Welcome to the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction Podcast.
This week's episode brings us two strange stories from the sea. The sea offers the perfect setting for short stories. It's dramatic, vast, and by extension mysterious. We only know a fraction of what actually lives in its depths. No wonder then that it captured the imagination of the authors featured in this episode. The first story in this episode is titled Over the Side by W. Jacobs, a short story first written in the early 20th century. It can now be found in our Gothic fantasy collection, Pirates and Ghosts. So here is Over the Side by W. Jacobs.
Of all classes of men, those who follow the sea are probably the most prone to superstition. Afloat upon the black waste of waters, at the mercy of wind and sea, with vast depths and strange creatures below them, a belief in the supernatural is easier than ashore under the cheerful gas lamps. Strange stories of the sea are plentiful, and an incident which happened within my own experience has made me somewhat chary of dubbing a man fool or coward because he has encountered something he cannot explain. There are stories of the supernatural with prosaic sequels. There are others to which the sequel has never been published. I was 15 years old at the time, and as my father, who had a strong objection to the sea, would not apprentice me to it, I shipped before the mast on a sturdy little brig called the Endeavour, bound for Riga. She was a small craft, but the skipper was as fine a seaman as one could wish for, and in fair weather, an easy man to sail under. Most boys have a rough time of it when they first go to sea, but with a strong sense of what was good for me, I had attached myself to a brawny, good-natured infant named Bill Smith, and it was soon understood that whoever hit me struck Bill by proxy. Not that the crew were particularly brutal, but a sound cuffing occasionally is held by most seamen to be beneficial to a lad's health and morals. The only really spiteful fellow among them was a man named Jem Dad. He was a morose, sallow-looking man of about 40 with a strong taste for the supernatural, and a stronger taste still for frightening his fellows with it. I have seen Bill almost afraid to go on deck of a night for his trick at the wheel after a few of his reminiscences. Rats were a favourite topic with him, and he would never allow one to be killed if he could help it, for he claimed for them that they were the souls of drowned sailors, hence their love of ships and their habit of leaving them when they become unseaworthy. He was a firm believer in the transmigration of souls, some idea of which he had no doubt picked up in eastern ports, and gave his shivering auditors to understand that his arrangements for his own immediate future were already perfected. We were 6 or 7 days out when a strange thing happened. Dad had the second watch one night, and Bill was to relieve him. They were not very strict aboard the brig in fair weather, and when a man's time was up he just made the wheel fast, and running forward shouted down the forecastle. On this night, I happened to awake suddenly, in time to see Bill slip out of his bunk and stand by me, rubbing his red eyelids with his knuckles. "Dad's given me a long time," he whispered, seeing that I was awake. "It's a whole hour after his time." He patted up on deck, and I was just turning over, thankful that I was too young to have a watch to keep, when he came softly down again, and, taking me by the shoulders, shook me roughly. "Jack," he whispered. "Jack!" I raised myself on my elbows, and in the light of the smoking lamp saw that he was shaking all over. "Come on deck," he said thickly. I put on my clothes and followed him quietly to the sweet, cool air above. It was a beautiful, clear night, but from his manner I looked nervously around for some cause of alarm. I saw nothing. The deck was deserted, except for the solitary figure at the wheel. "Look at him," whispered Bill, bending a contorted face to mine. I walked after a few steps, and Bill followed slowly. Then I saw that Jem Dad was leaning forward clumsily on the wheel, with his hands clenched on the spokes. "He's asleep," said I, stopping short. Bill breathed hard. "He's in a queer sleep," said he. "Kind of trance more like. Go closer." I took fast hold of Bill's sleeve, and we both went. The light of the stars was sufficient to show that Dad's face was very white, and that his dim black eyes were wide open, and staring in a very strange and dreadful manner straight before him. "Dad," said I softly. "Dad!" There was no reply, and with a view of arousing him, I tapped one sinewy hand as it gripped the wheel, and even tried to loosen it. He remained immovable, and suddenly with a great cry my courage deserted me, and Bill and I fairly bolted down into the cabin and woke the skipper. Then we saw how it was with Jem, and 2 strong seamen forcibly loosened the grip of those rigid fingers, and, laying him on the deck, covered him with a piece of canvas. The rest of the night 2 men stayed at the wheel, and gazing fearfully at the outline of the canvas, longed for dawn. It came at last, and, breakfast over, the body was sewn up in canvas, and the skipper held a short service compiled from a Bible which belonged to the mate, and what he remembered of the burial service proper. Then the corpse went overboard with a splash, and the men, after standing awkwardly together for a few minutes, slowly dispersed to their duties. For the rest of that day we were all very quiet and restrained. Pity for the dead man became mingled with the dread of taking the wheel when night came. "The wheel's haunted," said the cook solemnly. "Mark my words, there's more of you will be took the same way Dad was." The cook, like myself, had no watch to keep. The men bore up pretty well until night came on again, and then they unanimously resolved to have a double watch. The cook, sorely against his will, was impressed into the service, and I, glad to oblige my patron, agreed to stay up with Bill. Some of the pleasure had vanished by the time night came, and I seemed only just to have closed my eyes when Bill came, and with a rough shake or 2 informed me that the time had come. Any hope that I might have had of escaping the ordeal was at once dispelled by his expectant demeanour, and the helpful way in which he assisted me with my clothes, and, yawning terribly, I followed him on deck. The night was not so clear as the preceding one, and the air was chilly, with a little moisture in it. I buttoned up my jacket and thrust my hands in my pockets. "Everything quiet?" asked Bill as he stepped up and took the wheel. "Aye, aye," said Roberts, "quiet as the grave," and, followed by his willing mate, he went below. I sat on the deck by Bill's side as, with a light touch on the wheel, he kept the brig to her course. It was weary work sitting there doing nothing and thinking of the warm berth below, and I believe that I should have fallen asleep, but that my watchful companion stirred me with his foot whenever he saw me nodding. I suppose I must have sat there, shivering and yawning, for about an hour, when, tired of inactivity, I got up and went and leaned over the side of the vessel. The sound of the water gurgling and lapping by was so soothing that I began to doze. I was recalled to my senses by a smothered cry from Bill, and running to him, I found him staring to port in an intense and uncomfortable fashion. At my approach, he took one hand from the wheel and gripped my arm so tightly that I was like to have screamed with the pain of it. "Jack," said he in a shaky voice. "While you was away, something popped its head up and looked over the ship's side." "You've been dreaming," said I, in a voice which was a very fair imitation of Bill's own. "Dreaming," repeated Bill. "Dreaming? Oh, look there!" He pointed with an outstretched finger, and my heart seemed to stop beating as I saw a man's head appear above the side. For a brief space it peered at us in silence, and then a dark figure sprang like a cat onto the deck and stood crouching a short distance away. A mist came before my eyes and my tongue failed me, but Bill let off a roar, such as I have never heard before or since. It was answered from below, both aft and forward, and the men came running up on deck just as they left their beds. "What's up?" shouted the skipper, glancing aloft. For an answer, Bill pointed to the intruder, and the men, who had just caught sight of him, came up and formed a compact knot by the wheel. "Come over the side, it did," panted Bill. "Come over like a ghost out of the sea." The skipper took one of the small lamps from the binnacle, and holding it aloft, walked boldly up to the cause of alarm. In the little patch of light, we saw a ghastly, black-bearded man, dripping with water, regarding us with unwinking eyes, which glowed red in the light of the lamp. "Where did you come from?" asked the skipper. The figure shook its head. "Where did you come from?" he repeated, walking up and laying his hand on the other's shoulder. Then the intruder spoke. but in a strange fashion and in strange words. We leaned forward to listen, but even when he repeated them, we could make nothing of them. "He's a foreigner," said Roberts. "Blessed if I ever heard the lingo before," said Bill. "Does anybody recognise it?" Nobody did, and the skipper, after another attempt, gave it up, and falling back upon the universal language of signs, pointed first to the man and then to the sea. The other understood him, and, in a heavy, slovenly fashion, portrayed a man drifting in an open boat and clutching and clambering up the side of a passing ship. As his meaning dawned upon us, we rushed to the stern, and leaning over peered into the gloom, but the night was dark and we saw nothing. "Well," said the skipper, turning to Bill with a mighty yawn, "take him below and give him some grub, and the next time a gentleman calls on you, don't make such a confounded row about it." He went below, followed by the mate, and after some slight hesitation, Robert stepped up to the intruder and signed him to follow. He came stolidly enough, leaving a trail of water on the deck, and after changing into the dry things we gave him, fell to, but without much appearance of hunger, upon some salt beef and biscuits, regarding us between bites with black, lacklustre eyes. "He seems as though he's a-walking in his sleep," said the cook. "He ain't very hungry," said one of the men. "He seems to mumble his food." "Hungry!" repeated Bill, who had just left the wheel. "Course he ain't famished. He had his tea last night." The men stared at him in bewilderment. "Don't you see?" said Bill, still in a hoarse whisper. "Ain't you ever seen them eyes before? Don't you know what he used to say about dying? It's Jem Dad come back to us. Jem Dad got another man's body, as he always said he would." "Rot," said Roberts, trying to speak bravely. But he got up, and with the others huddled together at the end of the forecastle, and stared in a bewildered fashion at the sodden face and short, squat figure of our visitor. For his part, having finished his meal, he pushed his plate from him, and leaning back on the locker looked at the empty bunks. Roberts caught his eye, and with a nod and a wave of his hand indicated the bunks. The fellow rose from the locker, and, amid a breathless silence, climbed into one of them. "Jem Dad's." He slept in the dead sailor's bed that night, the only man in the forecastle who did sleep properly, and turned out heavily and lumpishly in the morning for breakfast. The skipper had him on deck after the meal, but could make nothing of him. To all his questions he replied in the strange tongue of the night before, and though our fellows had been to many ports, and knew a word or two of several languages, none of them recognised it. The skipper gave it up at last, and, left to himself, he stared about him for some time, regardless of our interest in his movements, and then, leaning heavily against the side of the ship, stayed there so long that we thought he must have fallen asleep. "He's half dead now," whispered Roberts. "Hush!" said Bill. "Maybe he's been in the water a week or two and can't quite make it out. See how he's looking at it now." He stayed on deck all day in the sun, but, as night came on, returned to the warmth of the forecastle. The food we gave him remained untouched, and he took little or no notice of us, though I fancied that he saw the fear we had of him. He slept again in the dead man's bunk, and when morning came, still lay there. Until dinner time, nobody interfered with him, and then Roberts, pushed forward by the others, approached him with some food. He motioned it away with a dirty, bloated hand, and, making signs for water, drank it eagerly. For 2 days he stayed there quietly, the black eyes always open, the stubby fingers always on the move. On the third morning, Bill, who had conquered his fear sufficiently to give him water occasionally, called softly to us. "Come and look at him," said he. "What's the matter with him?" "He's dying," said the cook with a shudder. "He can't be going to die yet," said Bill blankly. As he spoke, the man's eyes seemed to get softer and more lifelike, and he looked at us piteously and helplessly. From face to face he gazed in mute inquiry, and then, striking his chest feebly with his fist, uttered 2 words. We looked at each other blankly, and he repeated them eagerly and again touched his chest. "It's his name," said the cook, and we all repeated them. He smiled in an exhausted fashion, and then, rallying his energies, held up a forefinger. As we stared at this new riddle, he lowered it, and held up all 4 fingers doubled. "Come away," quavered the cook. "He's putting a spell on us." We drew back at that, and back farther still as he repeated the motions. Then Bill's face cleared suddenly, and he stepped towards him. "He means his wife and youngers," he shouted eagerly. "This ain't no gem, Dad." It was good then to see how our fellows drew round the dying sailor and strove to cheer him. Bill, to show he understood the finger business, nodded cheerily, and held his hand at 4 different heights from the floor. The last was very low, so low that the man set his lips together and strove to turn his heavy head from us. "Poor devil," said Bill. "He wants us to tell his wife and children what's become of him. He must have been dying when he came aboard. What was his name again?" But the name was not so easy to English lips, and we had already forgotten it. "Ask him again," said the cook, "and write it down. Who's got a pen?" He went to look for one as Bill turned to the sailor to get him to repeat it. Then he turned round again, and eyed us blankly, for by this time the owner had himself forgotten it.
In some ways, this story emphasises how the sea played a much larger role in the past. It was the primary mode of transport, trade, and adventure. However, this episode also brings us another story published 2 years ago in our short story collection titled Lost Atlantis. A theme that suggests lost civilizations within the ocean's depths, and that's exactly what this author, Spencer Orey, achieves in his story. This is A Poison of Bodies Beneath the Water by Spencer Orey.
Another barrage of glowing boulders struck the water around the ship, until one finally burst through with a spray of wood and flailing bodies. Watching from the depths, I already wanted to intercept the survivors, to slit their throats, to seize some small revenge against these surface dwellers who dared pollute the sea with poisonous magic. The corpses would remain on the seafloor, but their blood at least could diffuse to feed other creatures. My sister Lolia held me light at her side. Not long. She was right. To go now, with boulders still raining down, when the ship itself was beginning to rain down too, splintering into pieces that cascaded into the water like glowing arrows, would be too dangerous. Soon, survivors would launch in little boats. Others would swim for the coast, only to drown in the harsh currents, unless we bled them first. Years earlier, ships had sailed the other direction. Those had been warships, filled with shining metal-armored soldiers. Most had returned. Afterward, the flow of these pathetic smaller ships had begun. We assumed the warships had left behind such terrible desolation that the conquered had grown desperate enough to seek refuge in the land of their conquerors. Those that we bled were not soldiers, for they bore no weapons or armor. Most were already close to death, haggard bodies clothed in rags. But when their ships burst apart, it no longer mattered who they'd been. They became dirty flesh, poison in the sea, a threat to be eliminated here so that our city could stay pure. 3 small boats deployed from the sinking ship, fewer than usual. More boulders, glowing so bright that even from the depths I saw them ripple through the air above, plummeted to strike. One detonated into the first boat, and bodies struck the water already dead. Some of them glowed where they'd been hit. The second boat escaped the barrage to continue with its course, but it wouldn't survive long. Lolia released her hold on me, beckoning me forward. Instead, I watched the third boat. A glowing bubble slowly lowered around the boat, enclosing it completely. Then the bubbled boat submerged, descending into the depths, into our territory. I expected it to head toward land, but instead it turned away, but not in the direction it had come. It had a different destination. A new poison, Lolia said. They'd spread their filth. So, we had the same idea. I will take care of the boat, I said. Do not draw close until you can be certain of safety. I would not lose you to the rot, she said. Good hunting, sister. I will meet you back in the city. With a flick of my tail, I was off. To touch the glowing bubble around the boat would mean my death. Everything glowing like that was poisonous to sea creatures. We knew it to be the surface magic, but called it the rot, and even one rotten touch could rob us of our lives underwater by destroying our gills and fins. With each glowing boulder, with each repelled ship, the seafloor grew more devastated. Once, coral had thrived here. Now, it was a graveyard, littered with glowing wreckage, bones and rocks, devoid of life. I kept my distance at first, in case more boulders launched in pursuit. The boat was the brightest thing in the sea, and easy to follow. I knew the area well, a shivering kelp forest that stretched to the undersea mountain and its sacred caves. The boat lowered enough to brush one long strand, and the kelp shrank away as if bitten, then withered and detached, floating free. As long as that bubble persisted, there was little I could do. I swam closer in search of an opening. I counted 9 figures on the boat, only 9. The one in the middle was responsible for the glowing bubble. They held a staff, and the bubble grew out from it, around the ship. A wizard. The other 8 were children. Most sat wide-eyed, clutching onto each other. A few were crying. I understood where the ship was headed. Inside the undersea mountain was a sacred cave where my people had first shed their disgusting land flesh, where we'd become Mer. I'd learned of the cave as a small hatchling, but I never journeyed there. It was a place as sacred as it was shameful, a marker of a time when we hadn't belonged in the sea. The wizard should not have known about it. My people do not share our myths, but perhaps there'd been a traitor long ago, before we learned to defend our borders. In stories, the cave's magic only worked on the young. It could transform these children, but not the wizard who'd saved them from shipwreck and then sought one last impossible chance for their safety. Unworthy, unwelcome children. If I let them swim free of the mountain, they'd pollute my people as much as their glowing magic poisoned the sea. Better to dispose of them before they transformed. My understanding also gave me an easy opening. The wizard wanted the children to join my people. All I had to do was act welcoming. I hid my knife in its holster on my back. Then I swam above the ship, close enough for them to see the silhouette of my tail. I couldn't hear the children, but I saw a few of them reach their hands to their disgusting little mouths in gasps of recognition. I waved. I darted over the boat again. A couple of children tugged on the wizard's robe, pointing at me. I could see her better now too. Weary, jaw clenched, hands clasped on the staff to maintain the spell. What horrors had they all faced that had driven them to cross unfriendly waters? Did the wizard know she was protecting the only survivors of the ship? To be responsible for those small, broken lives would be an unbearable weight. All I had to do was cause her to slip enough to break the bubble. At this depth, the force of the water alone would be enough to crush them all. So I danced for them. I mimicked pulling at the wizard's robe and long braid of hair. I even mimicked pushing her staff, but the children must have been warned against anything like that. The undersea mountain loomed larger, darkening the water with its shadow. The wizard held absolutely unyielding in focus, no matter how many children I convinced to help with the distraction. Perhaps it would be best to wait inside the cave, where the exhausted wizard would have to drop her spell to let the children out. To let them inside would be shameful, but it was best to heed Lolia's warning and protect myself in the hunt. I waved to the children and then darted ahead. The cave mouth was larger than I'd imagined, with a current of its own pulling me closer. It was a cave that wanted to be visited. Past the mouth, the opening became a rocky tunnel into the mountain. The walls twinkled with true magic, illuminating barnacles and algae. This was my people's magic, not the foul, glowing poison of the surface dwellers, a magic that fostered life. I swam past massive statues, ancient tributes to our transformation. They'd been sculpted by the first Mer artisans, the same who'd built our city. I followed the tunnel to a wide cylindrical passage up into the heart of the mountain, where the water grew soothing warm against my scales. I ascended. The walls twinkled brighter, a sign of powerful magic. The children could transform here if I didn't stop them. Above, I saw a shimmer of the surface. Just below it, a stone staircase led up out of the water to a sculpted bowl. This could only be the site of transformation, where my ancestors had given up their legs to become something far greater. There could be nothing more sacred. Beautiful, twinkling light cascaded from the bowl, promising magic. Then, a poisonous glow tainted the water too. The boat was rising. It was time. I again pretended to welcome the children. I waved. I darted through the water. The children waved back at me, jumping in place. Good. Let them be excited. Let them trust me. All I needed was for the wizard to lower the bubble. I had just long enough to evaluate the wizard before the boat surfaced. She was on one knee, breathing heavily, still gripping her staff. She looked to be almost out of strength. I stuck my head above the water. It was disgusting to be in the air, to feel water run down my hair and face and neck, to feel my skin start to dry. Worst of all, above the hum of the poisoned bubble, I heard the laughter of the children. I waved for them to jump into the water. They waved for me to join them. The boat pulled closer to the bowl where the children could be transformed. And yet, as I'd suspected, the bowl was too high to be reached from the boat. They'd have to enter the water first, to swim to the stairs and climb from there. All I had to do was wait. The wizard staggered. The bubble dropped. All poisonous light suddenly vanished, leaving only the perfect twinkle of the cave. Children cheered and rushed to the railing, rocking the boat. "Sister, stay back," the wizard called out. "They belong here as much or more than we do." Sister? That could explain how she knew about the cave. So, the wizard had once been Mer. She had been one of my sisters, but she'd returned to the surface. She'd traded her people away to learn the secrets of poison. A traitor. She'd see the error of her ways when I gutted her. She'd understand the folly of choosing lesser life forms, of betraying her kind. I reached for my knife. The wizard spun my way, staff pointed. I dove underwater. A glowing ray of light sizzled past where I'd been and hissed against the stone wall. In the open sea, I would have hidden under the boat, then arced over the side to begin the slaughter. But in water this pure, this clear, it was hard to hide. I dodged another ray of light. It burst apart a statue, one of the timeless treasures of my people. I dodged again, easily. I belonged in this place, but she was an outsider now. Her strength would give out first. No rays of light followed. I surfaced warily, ready to dart away. A few of the children had grabbed the wizard's arms and were screaming at her to stop. Please, help, I called to them. She wants to hurt me. That mermaid is not your friend, the wizard yelled. She shrugged off the children and fired again. I didn't even have to move. Her aim was off, and the ray looked thinner than ones before. One child screamed, "Don't hurt her." Another child tackled the wizard in the legs. She wobbled, and the whole boat rocked with her. "Stop it, everyone. Agamina is the one keeping us safe," an older girl said. The boat rocked as children pushed each other. "Quick, children, dive into the water," I called. "I'll catch you." I opened my arms wide. "No, all of you stay back." The wizard raised her staff, and the bubble of light began to bloom out to cover the boat. But a little girl locked eyes with me, face bright with trust. She stepped onto the railing and opened her arms. "Pull her back," the wizard yelled. 2 children reached for her, but they were too slow. The girl jumped into the water. I stayed out of reach. A cloud of dirt wafted off of her, polluting this sacred place. Time to see if she could swim. A ray of light seared past me. "Stop!" one of the children yelled. A deeper splash. The wizard was in the water. A child had pushed her in. Wonderful. I pulled out my knife. The wizard's robes floated around her, blocking her vision. But she spun, striking with her staff, trying to hit me. But we were in the air no longer. This was my people's rightful domain, my birthright. I surged forward with my knife, but only managed to slice the sleeve of her robe before she raised her staff and a glowing bubble bloomed out. I ducked away. Another splash, then more, from children jumping in. The boat rocked more, then tipped over, and suddenly all of the children were in the water. The girl who jumped in first was swimming for the stairs. Foul creature. How dare these dirty little things dream of becoming like me, of being worthy to live in the depths. I darted forward with my knife and struck the girl through the back of her shoulder. It was easy. I darted away and struck another child in the chest, knife sliding smoothly through that small sternum. The other children began to panic and scream in realization, but that only made things easier. They stayed in place. I struck another child in the gut. Only 5 to go, plus the wizard. Light flared from behind me, and I darted to the side. It was bold to fire at me like that, to risk hitting children, but no ray came. I spun and saw the wizard clutching a child under her arm, frantically trying to break the surface. One of them must not have been able to swim. In the rescue attempt, the wizard must have lost her grip on the staff. It floated near her in the water, still glowing faintly. This was my chance. I flicked my tail and surged forward. The wizard swam in little lurching strokes, burdened by her robe, and the little body clutched close. I grabbed her braid and ripped my knife down her back. She screamed, bubbles of air pouring out of her. But even then, she kept trying to raise the drowning child to the surface. I stabbed her again, and she sank backward. Now my task would be far easier. I adjusted my grip on my knife and twisted to find which of my targets were closest. There was a flare of light. Pain seared into my side. The older girl who tried to keep the others in line had prodded me with the staff. Little fool. I snarled and stabbed, punching my knife through her arm. But I felt the poison enter me, even from that small touch. The rot. It was already scorching from my side up to my shoulder. I lurched in the water, losing control. With a sharp pinch, my gills sealed. I ignored the children. I had to save myself before I could rid us of their pollution. But what could I do? The rot was so terribly fast. Poison sizzled down my tail. My scales began to itch, then flake away, and leaving behind soft flesh. and then my tail ripped into legs. Despite the agony, I still had a chance. If I climbed the stairs, I could breathe the foul air. After, I could figure out how to transform back. I pulled myself through the water with just my arms and reached the surface long enough to take a shameful breath of air. The bowl was full of children. I reached for the stone stairs, and the bowl released a torrent of twinkling bubbles that blocked my sight. I kept clawing forward. My hand hit the stone hard. I gasped in pain, but managed to grasp onto the side of the stairs. Something pulled at me from behind. I twisted, trying to fight, and found the wizard. Whether she'd die first from bleeding or drowning, she'd caught me. She wrapped her arm around my neck and pulled again, and I lost my grip on the stairs. This wizard, this traitor who'd once been one of my sisters, pulled me down, away from the children, and I could do nothing but watch. We drifted past two statues, standing together, arms linked. One had a tail, the other had legs. They were together, a monument to transformation, to a shared heritage. And then, above me, I saw the new myrrh. They darted through the water, collecting the children I'd hurt, helping them into the bowl. My vision darkened, but I saw the bowl release more bubbles, saw the hurt ones return to water, restored. Now they'd venture into the sea. With their very survival, they'd destroy the purity I'd fought to preserve. And they were beautiful. The little monsters had transformed into something not pure, but perfect.
A closed-off society of mermaids and wizards. I suppose it's true that anything could happen at sea. A big thank you to our authors and narrators. If you want to read more stories like these, be sure to look at the rest of the stories in our Pirates and Ghosts and Lost Atlantis short story collections.
Thanks so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast and look forward to the next episode. Do recommend it to your friends. Goodbye for now.